Hi, my name's Dan Brown. I'm sometimes better known as KanbanDan. I'm a Kanban coach and teacher. Today, I'm going to take you through a high-level introduction to Kanban. So what is Kanban? It's a method to improve service delivery. That is, it's a way to optimize the flow of value out of your knowledge work system and to keep improving that flow. Let's start with the principles that Kanban's built upon. Kanban's got two initial sets of principles, the change management principles and the service delivery principles. Starting with the change management principles. Start with what you do now sounds obvious, but actually most methods tell you to stop what you're doing now and instead do something completely different. This makes Kanban a descriptive method rather than a prescriptive method. It looks at what you're doing rather than telling you what to do. The assumption is that you're probably already pretty good at delivering your service. Otherwise, you'd probably not be in business anymore. So if things are already pretty good, let's use Kanban to make improvement opportunities visible to us, rather than redoing everything from scratch. Gain agreement to pursue continual improvement through evolutionary change means that we need to get everyone to buy into the cost and time implications of improvement activities. We're also looking to make intrinsic change rather than extrinsic change. This is because the changes are much more likely to happen if they come from ourselves rather than being forced upon us by an extrinsic factor, usually a senior manager, for example. We see the need for an improvement in a particular area of the system, and then we come up with the changes to make that improvement ourselves. The last change management principle is to encourage acts of leadership at all levels. We're often encouraged to make the mistake of thinking that only a small number of senior people who happen to be called leaders should take any leadership acts. If we're only relying on those few brains to understand the entire company, then we're likely to miss opportunities to improve. For example, LinkedIn famously shut down their entire IT delivery function for 3 months while they all concentrated on implementing continuous delivery. No product was done at all for that entire quarter, while they effectively removed technical debt from their systems and made it possible to ship product code much more quickly in the future. I can't imagine the CEO came into the office one day and said, "Hey, I've got an idea. Let's deliver no new product work for 3 months and reduce our technical debt." I want to suggest that the conversation was much more that the business were getting very frustrated with slow delivery and the techies were getting very frustrated with having to pay all that work tax for the technical debt. So they took the leadership act of suggesting that work should stop while they eliminate not only the technical debt, but the mechanism by which the technical debt had built up so it could never happen again. That was a brave leadership act. The people who are best placed to see the problems and opportunities need to be the ones who take the leadership responsibility to act on them. The next set of principles are around service delivery. We focus on the customer, which again sounds obvious, but isn't what most businesses actually do. Often we focus our change around what a manager thinks a customer should want, but by focusing directly on the customer, we can build experiments to measure what customers actually do, rather than what they tell us. Customers usually don't actually know what they want until they do something with our services. A great example of this is the Land Rover Discovery. It's a fantastic, big, heavy off-road 4x4 vehicle. So the automatic gearbox is fantastic at working out what gear you need to be in, either on-road or off-road. So why does it have a flappy paddle override of the gearbox on the steering wheel, like it's a flashy Italian supercar? It hardly ever actually gets used by customers. It just sits there and occasionally actually gets in the way when you're trying to maneuver in a car park or around a field and makes you struggle to get back into the gear you need to be into drive. So why is it there? Well, I was lucky enough to actually talk to some engineers who work at Land Rover Research and Development, and they told me that it's there because customers in a focus group had requested it. But in real life, it's actually more of a pain for customers than a real benefit. So in effect, they've engineered in a sales tool that increases sales, but actually makes the product worse for most customers. However, it's only when you drive the vehicle for any length of time that you realize it's a pain rather than a benefit. So that's fine for a car sale where it's a one-time purchase, but not for a service where you're relying on customers to stay with your product or even tell people so that they'll come and use the product too. That story highlights that we need to be able to understand our customers and their behaviors better than they understand themselves. So we need to focus our energies on improving the services for our customers and validating our learning with real data for their benefit. We need to measure what they actually do with our products, not just ask them what they like or what they would like. Service delivery principle number 2 is manage the work and let the people self-organize around it. This is absolutely key in Kanban. Many people feel like we need to manage what people do or they won't do anything. This is theory X or Taylorism. And it's not well suited to the psychology of modern knowledge workers who are trying to solve complex problems. Theory Y is much more suited to our context, so we should let our people work out how to do what they need to do and stay out of their way, while we instead manage the work and look for ways to improve how the value flows out of our systems. So they manage how they do the thing, we help them manage what's being done. Principle number 3 is that we evolve our policies to improve customer outcomes. You'll shortly be seeing the Kanban practice of using explicit policies in our systems. And this principle is about making sure we look to evolve those explicit policies with the intent of improving service delivery to the customer to help them meet their outcomes. If we do what is good for the customer, then it follows that will also be good for us. Let's move on to the practices of Kanban. Practice number 1 is visualize the system. Kanban is a visual management method which allows us to see what is really going on. We often have an unrealistic belief of what's happening in our work systems, so Kanban looks to take the guesswork out of it. Once we see what's really going on, we can make better decisions about what to do. We start by mapping out the current system. Start with what you do now is the principle which should be guiding us here. There's no point in mapping out what we would like our idealized system to look like. That would be starting from a place you haven't got to yet. We want our visualization to be an accurate and true mirror to our system of work. There are some fables of some unethical fashion stores where mirrors in the changing rooms are slightly curved, like skinny mirrors in fairground sideshows. The idea was that you only look in the mirror once you've got your new clothes on, so it seems like the new clothes are very slimming on you, and you are tricked into buying them. The other trick they use is to have a flat mirror, which is slightly angled upwards. That is a lesser version of the same effect. The point is, for us, that we do not want a skinny mirror of our system. We need to see it as it truly is, warts and all. We actually want ugliness on the board, and it's not the board that's ugly, it's the system that it's mapping. And the board is letting us see where we might want to focus our continuous improvement efforts. We should fix the ugly system, then update the board to map to the newer, better system. Of course, as soon as we do that, we'll find some ugliness happening elsewhere on the board, and that's showing us the next thing that we need to improve, and then remap the board again. It's important that your board shows not only all of the different work states, but also the queuing states in your system. For example, if we have a simple system for software development that's analysis, development, test, deploy as the working states, we probably would have a backlog on the left-hand side, followed by a ready for analysis area where we're looking to commit to work and start to limit our work in progress. So they're both queuing states, followed by analysis, then ready for dev, which is a queue, into dev, ready for test, which is again another queue, into test, into ready for deploy, then deployment, then done. That way we're showing the queues and the times that we're actually working on things. It's amazing how people think we're always working on things when actually a lot of the time, in fact, most of the time, work will be queuing for different things, different people who need to work on it. This board needs to map all of the states, not just the working states. This will also encourage a pull system rather than a push system, and all Kanban systems are pull based. You can use physical boards or electronic boards, but the point is to keep it visible and not hide it somewhere. There's a real risk that if you use an electronic board, that you open it just to move the tickets across and then hide it again. And then it's not really helping you. It's not showing you what's going on. You're not actually having to live with the board looking as it does. It's not causing you to take action to improve. I would actually advise many people to do both a physical board and an electronic board. There's an overhead to keeping them both up to date with each other, but actually they're both very good for different things. Electronic boards are great for keeping track of all of your metrics, measuring when tickets moved and how long they took and so on. They're also great aggregators for all of the different documentation and comments and other things that happen during the life of a card. So it's good to have one place where you can keep all that. However, people emote differently with physical boards. It feels good to actually move a ticket into done. There's a bizarre psychological effect going on there. Moving tickets right feels good. And also, if things aren't going so well, being able to write a sticky note and stick it on the card on the board feels more involved than just writing a comment on a system which is kind of hidden away unless someone looks at it. This is there for everyone to see. You can jab your finger on the card. You can put a big blocked sticker, and it feels like we're emoting with the board, and it's playing into a different part of our brain. So there's real advantage to doing both. Practice number 2 is limiting work in progress. By limiting WIP, we will reduce the lead time of things we are actually working on. That is the time from committing to do the work item to having that service live in front of real customers. There is a hidden benefit that reducing the lead time on a piece of work will always reduce the effort it takes to finish it. That's because mostly what we do in the office is to task switch between different work. We try to focus on one thing, but then we get a phone call or a desk stop from someone asking about something else. When we come back to the original work, we think, where was I? This leads to relearning waste. We can actually categorize all of our work into value work and failure demand. Relearning is failure demand, as if we hadn't been interrupted, we would never have had to do that work. So it can't be value work, it's failure demand. We all know that if you have something to do for a tight deadline, the last place we're ever going to do it is at our desk. We either hide somewhere else in the office at a hot desk out of the way, or even work from home. This is so that we can concentrate on that one thing without interruption. In other words, reduce our work in progress down to 1. How many times have you come to the end of the day and noticed a half-written email reply that never got sent, either in your drafts folder or on your desktop? That means an email probably interrupted you from a piece of work you'd planned to do, and then you got interrupted again from writing the reply to that email and then never got back to it. By limiting our work in progress, the task can be done in the shortest possible time with minimal interruptions. So less effort is needed on the task. We reduce the failure demand. If we do that for all of our tasks, then we have reduced the failure demand on all of them, and we only ever focus on value work. The added benefit is that the quality of the work is also improved by the fact that we've concentrated on it. By getting work done faster, we also deliver value earlier. We reduce the cost of delay, which is always the biggest cost on all of the work that we do. We often focus on the cost of delivery, but cost of delay is how much money it's costing us that this thing isn't live yet. We get feedback from our customers earlier, so we're able to pivot more quickly and spend less time working on potentially what is the wrong thing, which again reduces failure demand. In short, limiting work in progress is the single most effective thing that we can do to increase productivity, quality, and happiness in the office, because we're happier when we get to focus on finishing one thing at a time. It's a true virtuous circle. What's more is, you all know this intuitively, because we don't usually make all of our work visible at work. We don't realize how much we're hurting ourselves by not limiting the work in progress and by working on so many things at once. Humans have been doing this for years. Here's a great example. How do you make a footprint on the moon like Buzz Aldrin did? NASA used to actually have a slogan printed on their mugs in the 1950s and 60s. Do one thing at a time with supreme excellence. In other words, limit your work in progress and focus on quality. And that's the slogan we followed to put people onto the moon. There's actually a mathematical law which connects your work in progress to your average lead time and your delivery rate. The delivery rate is your rate of throughput of completed work items. This law is called Little's Law. I've got a separate video on Little's Law, but the highlight is that when you change your WIP, the first thing that's always impacted is your lead time, and then the change on your delivery rate follows. That means by reducing work in progress, we shorten lead time, which increases delivery rate. That means we get more work items completed per day. If we have a good and predictable delivery rate of, say, 0.5 work items finishing per day, that's one work item every other day finishing, and say we have 50 work items remaining, then we know it'll take us 100 more days to complete. That makes prediction really simple. People often think that this means we need to consistently size our work items, but actually the maths works even better when we have some variability in the size. We often talk about estimation in service delivery, but since we want variability in our size of work items, then estimates actually have very little value to us. They can even be a bit dangerous, as human psychology usually pushes us into being overly optimistic, into committing to deadlines that we can never meet, and putting everyone into trouble. It also badly understands the kind of work we are actually doing. In order to be delivering some real business value, most of our work is complex and adaptive. That means the type of work hasn't been done before, either here or probably anywhere, and the act of trying to solve the problem will often change the problem we're trying to solve. That means we have a lot of emergence when we have high complexity. So when we estimate, we're often estimating the complexity of the work item, which really boils down to how much don't we know about how to solve this problem. We then use the answer to that question to try and predict how long it will take to solve the problem, which when you think about it is a bit bizarre, because they are very unlikely to be related. Better instead to use estimation as a tool to drive tacit knowledge out from team members' heads just before they start work on the problem. But ignore the estimate that the process produces, because actually it has very little value. If you want to forecast, then use previous lead times for work as the tool. Once we have data, then we know that the 85th percentile of the average lead time to date is a good SLA for any work that we're about to start. Or you can use the 15th and 85th percentiles as good, best, and worst case values to use to make a corner of uncertainty on a cumulative flow chart or burn-up chart to give a better forecast range. That sounds complex, but many tools have this baked in, and I have an Excel sheet you can download from GitHub for free, and that will get you started. It takes less effort than estimation and can be done by anyone involved in the work rather than the experts working in delivery. But how should you size your work items? I use dry stone walls as a metaphor. So, when you're building a dry stone wall, you start with a pile of stones. You take the stone at the top of the pile, which is the highest priority stone in effect, and find a place to use it in your wall. If you didn't do that and you tried to search through your pile of stones to find just the right stone for the gap, what you'd find is that you haven't built any new wall and you spent a lot of effort moving the pile from one place in one order to another place in another order. In other words, we've done lots of failure demand. You may notice in this photograph that the stones are of variable size. No two stones are identical, just like our work. Some are big and some are small. In order for the system to work, though, all we need to know about the stones in advance in the pile to be used is that they're in fact stones by our definition of a stone. So I define a stone as a piece of rock that I can pick up in my hands. If the piece of rock is too big for me to pick up, then I have to take out a hammer and chisel and break it down into stones. The same goes for our work items. They don't have to be equally sized. They just have to be within our boundaries of what is an acceptable work item for this system. So for example, if we have a single team with a 2-week delivery cycle, having work items that wouldn't finish inside 2 weeks would be too big. So if we identify a work item like that, we'd break it down and have them as smaller work items. It hardly takes any expertise or time to do that kind of sizing, so it doesn't bring our experts out of their current work items and give them the failure demand of estimating the work too early, i.e. when the tacit knowledge sharing will be of little benefit because it's too far away from when we start that piece of work. Instead, we can keep them on task, and any calls on their times are much more on the lines of, does this work item sound too big to you? Or, how many work items does this thing sound like to you? Which are much easier questions to answer. We can even use some maths to help us here too. The German tank problem is a famous problem solved by the Boffins in Bletchley Park in World War II, and it tells us that once you've completed 11 work items, there's only a 5% chance you'll find any smaller work items and a 5% chance you'll find any larger ones than the 11 we just completed. That's maths from the same people who brought you the programmable computer and cracked the Enigma codes, so it's got a really good basis. And you can see a good example of that on the Wikipedia page, but it is quite involved maths. The great news is that when you have maths like this, it works everywhere, and you don't really have to understand from first principles what it's doing to be able to use it, in the same way as you don't have to understand the intricacies of a common rail diesel injection system to be able to drive your car. You just got to know how to drive a car. Practice number 3, manage flow. So in Kanban systems, we're managing to increase the flow of value out of the system of work. So that's quite an important difference to what most people understand by it, which is to manage the flow of work through the system. In actual fact, that doesn't help us too much. What we need is the value delivered so that we can get the money we earn and the feedback. In effect, what we want is ketchup on our plate so we can dunk our chips in it, not ketchup moving from one part of the bottle to another part of the bottle, which really doesn't help us an awful lot. Kanban systems are pull-based, so we pull work into our system when we have capacity. We don't push work into our system. We know that overloaded systems run slowly. So if you think about a printer that you're waiting to get a huge document printed out, if it's going too slowly, the last thing you're going to do is trying to push more paper into the back, because what's going to happen is you're going to get a paper jam, and all of the work actually goes slower than it would have if you just left it alone. Let's take a look at that tomato ketchup bottle again. We all know what happens if you get a glass bottle of tomato ketchup that's full, and then you're trying to hold it upright and get the sauce out. You're going to get zero flow. Nothing's coming out because the bottleneck is at the end of the system and is jammed full of ketchup. At that point, you pretty much have two options. You can either try and implement a push system and smack the bottle on the backside and see what happens, which is usually a big dollop eventually falls out after a lot of effort and makes a big mess everywhere all over your shirt. Option number 2 is you can take your knife and put it into the bottleneck and pull some of the ketchup out and try and pull to induce flow. And that's exactly the metaphor of what we're trying to do with Kanban. We want to get the work flowing out. So if we get the angle right on our part empty bottle of ketchup, you can just get flow. If you can't get flow, we'll use a pull system to encourage flow to happen. What this also means is that utilization is really important. If you read Don Reinertson's book, Flow, you'll find that utilization in the high percentages is a really bad idea. If you think of a motorway that's 80% utilized, what you're talking about is a car park. What you really want for optimum flow on a motorway or any other system is between 35 to 60% of utilization. That way everyone who's on the system gets to get out of the system quickly, and the people who are waiting to join the system will actually get out of the system quicker than if they'd joined sooner. We know this all the time on the motorways because we get queues down to sheer weight of traffic. If we just imagine that as too many cars in progress effectively we've got the same system going on. Because we've now visualized our work, we can see all of the demand that's going through. And as we start to limit it, we can optimize the flow of value out of the system, get the most ketchup on the plate that we want to dip our chips into. If we use 100% utilization of our resources, of our people especially, then actually we're leaving no room for emergence. So we're late on day one because we're doing complex work that has high emergence. Therefore, we need to be very careful about underutilizing our people in planning to allow for the emergence to come and to take that extra slack from their time. There's a great mantra to help here. Flow where you can, pull where you must. And that tells you everything you need to know about flow, pull, and push. Push isn't actually mentioned in that mantra because this photograph here shows what happens when you enter into a push system. You end up with all of the demand getting pushed through slower. Everybody slows down because of all of the other people trying to push into the system. If we could somehow limit and restrict the amount of vehicles joining at the far side of the bridge and the amount of vehicles joining at this side of the bridge, then the traffic would flow better in the direction towards us. But also the traffic will probably flow better in the direction away from us, because all of that traffic is going to be impacted by the queues of traffic trying to come this way on the bridge. If we can implement some sort of toll booth system or congestion charge, something that stops people wanting to use the constrained resource, then we'll get optimum utilization of that constrained resource. And everyone who can use the system benefits. Those that aren't using the system are benefiting by not having to come through this constrained resource anyway. Practice number 4 is the use of explicit policies. So in Kanban systems, we describe the current system of work, but we do that by showing all of the policies explicitly. These aren't making up new rules, these are showing the rules you already abide by. But once you see all of the rules, it's very easy to understand how things work here. So if someone's new and comes along, they can understand what's happening. But also, it lets you see where you've got rules and if they are appropriate or not. It allows you to focus some of your continuous improvement on making these rules better. If you remember our service delivery principle of evolving the policies to the customer's benefit, that's what we want to do here. So we start by visualizing the rules we have. Then we run an experiment, and I mean a true scientific experiment. So we use the scientific method of having a hypothesis of what will happen if we break this rule. Then we break the rule and we measure if things improved or not. Did we get our expected outcome, or did something else happen? If that rule change evolved in improvement, then we change the rule. This, in effect, is the same as a plan, do, check, act cycle, or perhaps in Kinevin, probe, sense, respond would be a better way to think about it. But the idea is that we are going through a loop of identifying an opportunity for improvement, a change to a rule, a measure to validate the learning of what happened, then implementing a new rule. Practice number 5 is to set up feedback loops. Kanban systems are built on feedback loops because this helps break down all the perception barriers. Everyone's actually getting real validated learning from what happened rather than imagining or perceiving what's happening out there. It also challenges the fitness for purpose because we're actually getting real measurements on did that make the improvement we thought it was going to make, which enables us to make a more effective change. But we're not just looking to set up the single feedback loop from what we did and what it did to the customer. We're also looking to set up feedback internally across our service and across our organization. What was the impact of what we did here on another service that we're delivering elsewhere? Is there a shared service that needs to be involved in both of these services? How are they relating to each other? What was the impact to them? Did we take a 100% utilization of a shared surface, which means that someone else didn't get their thing done? So we need to make sure we set up feedback loops all around our systems. Practice number 6 is continual improvement, or Kaizen. We like a Japanese word, or at least we used to. We tend to try and avoid them in the Kanban community these days. We want to try and speak in plain language. But Kaizen means agreement to continual and evolutionary change. So we're looking to make small, frequent changes from what we do now rather than do something which we call kaikaku or revolutionary change, which is a big change from what we're doing now to something completely different. That means that we can avoid the transformation overhead. You may be aware of Satier's J-curve for change. So if you look at the blue line, that shows a simplified version showing the trend rather than the wiggly lines that you actually really get all over the place. But the idea is you're at some level of performance currently, around about 2000 on this chart, and you want to make a change to get to 4500. So you make a big change, and of course, performance initially drops off significantly. And this takes a long time before you bottom out and then come into an improvement because you're learning a new way of doing things. Performance will always drop off when you're learning something new. Eventually, you'll surpass your old 2000 position, get to your 4500, and then you'll refreeze in traditional change management at your new level of performance. As you may be able to see on the Kaizen version of this, we make lots of small changes which follow exactly the same J-curve. But because they are smaller changes, the depth of the drop-off is not as severe and the amount of time to come back up is nowhere near as long. So we make lots of lower risk changes. And by doing that, it doesn't matter if one of the changes in the middle doesn't work and actually makes things worse rather than better. You can just stop that change and change something else and make a different improvement. There's a very low risk to the change failing, so it doesn't matter that the change failed. We can try something else. It encourages us to be more experimental. What you actually do find is that as you're going through this continual change and getting used to continually changing, then your appetite for change increases a little bit, so the curves do grow a little bit over time. But actually, the point is that we're always striving to improve, so we never go through the refreezing process. We're always looking to make continual improvements. This, we believe, will get you there faster than a big revolutionary change. It certainly has a lot less risk and a lot less performance drop-off. So that's it. That's all of Kanban. My friend Andy Carmichael came up with a way of condensing all of Kanban into a single tweet, and it looks like this. See flow, start here, with visible work and policies, validate improvements. And that is the essence of everything we're trying to do. It's all about seeing the work as a flow of value, starting with what you do now, right now, make everything visible, whether it's the work or the policies, and actually validate your improvements with measurements. Don't just say, does this feel better? If you're doing that, then you're probably doing a good job at doing Kanban. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope this has been useful to you and will spur you on to go and learn more about Kanban, perhaps go on an accredited Kanban training class through the LKU. I've been Dan Brown, KanbanDan, and it's been my pleasure to introduce you to Kanban.